Good afternoon. Welcome to Introduction to Philosophy again. So we are in the second week of the semester, and we are now in the middle of covering philosophy of religion. So one of the things that we are going to be covering this week is the 5 ways of proving the existence of God, as set forth by St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologica. You can actually find all these 5 ways on pages 60 and 61 in the textbook. For today, we're just going to look at the third of these 5 ways, which I think is one of the more difficult to understand of the 5 ways. So just a little bit of background. St. Thomas Aquinas is actually a Catholic priest who lived during the 13th century. And he wrote this famous work called the Summa Theologica, which includes, among other things, an attempt to prove the existence of God by unaided reason. So the idea is that the existence of God is so clear and self-evident that you can actually prove it by the use of basic human reason or unaided reason. So that is the purpose of these 5 ways of God, to prove the existence of God by the use of unaided reason. So today, as I mentioned, we are just going to look at the third way. So the third way of proving God involves making an appeal, making a distinction between things whose existence is necessary and things that are possible to be or not to be. So to make it really clear, let me just show you this handout. So Aquinas makes a distinction between 2 kinds of things. First, there are things that are possible to be and not to be, and things whose existence is necessary. So this basic distinction is important. Please keep these 2 things in mind. So let me just spend a little bit of time first talking about these 2 things. So let's start with things that are possible to be and not to be. Things that are possible to be and not to be, they are quite simply the things that we see existing in the external world. All these things are, they exist right now, but it is also possible for them to not exist someday. It is also possible for them to have not existed at some point in the past. So there are many examples of these things, but some of them would be, chairs, tables, humans, animals, and other contingently existing objects. Now, strictly speaking, fictional objects would also count as things that are possible to be and not to be, because Santa Claus might exist in your imagination, but you could also imagine him as not existing at all, not even in your imagination. So something like Santa Claus would also be a thing that is possible to be and not to be. So there is in Aquinas' worldview, there are the things that are possible to be and not to be. And then the second class of things are, as I mentioned earlier, there are things whose existence is necessary. Now, there are 2 kinds of things that fall into this category. The first kind of thing is mathematical concepts. Now, mathematical concepts have necessary existence because you can imagine that in some other corner of the universe in which there are no living beings at all, 2 plus 2 would still be equals 4. In that corner of the universe, 1 would still be equals 1. So mathematical concepts are things whose existence holds true, no matter where you are, no matter what happens. The other necessary concept, according to Aquinas, is God. The existence of God is necessary, according to Aquinas, because in order for anything to be at all, there has to be something that has been around to create it, and only something that is powerful enough to create everything else is God. So, pardon me. Okay, now so remember, to recap, there are basically these 2 kinds of things in Aquinas' universe. There are things that are possible to be and not to be, and also things whose existence is necessary, and that includes things like mathematical concepts and God. So now the question is, how does Aquinas use these 2 concepts to try to prove the existence of God? Before I go into the details, let me just say one more thing. So one thing that Aquinas believes in is this very basic principle, which is that nothing can come from nothing. If something, if there is something around, then at some point there must have been something else in existence before that to bring that about. So nothing can come from nothing. If there is nothing, then there will be nothing in the future. But if there is something now, then something has to have existed beforehand to bring this thing into existence. So you and I both exist right now. So something must have existed before you and I to bring you and I into existence. So based on this very basic idea, what Aquinas would say is this. According to Aquinas, if all that ever existed were things that are possible to be and not to be, then at one point in time there would have been nothing in existence. Why? Well, think about it this way. So according to Aquinas, imagine that anything that ever existed were chairs and tables and human beings, things that that could have existed or could have not existed at some point. Now, according to Aquinas, if all the things that ever existed are things that are possible to be and not to be, then according to him, at some point nothing would have been in existence, because if chairs and tables need human beings to bring them into existence, and human beings need other human beings to bring them into existence, then according to him, there must have been a time when nothing was in existence. But that's impossible. That's totally absurd according to him, because if there was a point in which nothing was in existence, remember, nothing can come from nothing. So if there was a point in time in which nothing was in existence, that means that even today there will still be nothing, because nothing can come from nothing. But we know that's not true. Today there are things around us. There's you, there's me, and there's this handout. So if there are things around us today, then there must have been other things that existed before us. But Aquinas believes that there cannot have been a point of time in which there cannot just have been all these things that are contingently existing, that are possible to be and not to be, because if this is the case, at some point nothing would have existed. So according to Aquinas, what this shows is that the only things, the things that exist in the universe cannot all have been things that are possible to be and not to be. So remember, going back to the first handout, there are two kinds of things, right? Things whose existence is necessary and sorry, wrong handout. There are two kinds of things in the world: things whose existence is necessary and things that are possible to be and not to be. Now, so according to Aquinas, it really cannot be the case that at one point that all the things that have ever existed are things that are possible to be and not to be. So what that means is that there must be some things in the world whose existence is necessary. We know for a fact that there are mathematical concepts. We understand what is 1 plus 1 and what is 2 plus 2. But according to Aquinas, that is not enough, because mathematical concepts cannot come into existence by themselves. The only necessary thing that can come into existence by itself is God. So what that means is that in order for there to not have been nothing at one point in time, God has to have always existed. So therefore, according to Aquinas, God has to always have existed and is still existing, because without his existence, all the things that are in the world would merely be things that are either possible to be and not to be, and then we will be in this case where at some point there would have been nothing, and that's absurd. So at one point, and even now, God still exists according to Aquinas. Okay, so what I have done so far is to briefly explain to you Aquinas' argument.